Evening, everybody. Welcome to our AJA Wednesday night Zoom series, and thank you very much for joining us this evening. I can see the chat is already excited, and we have a new president in America who we hope will bring in a new era of change and excitement and benefit for Israel. Before we launch tonight's event, we're going to start with a welcome to a new member of the AJ who was already a committee member, but who had a wonderful news. Our new state director in Melbourne, we have Tamir Aloni. So you might have read about that in our newsletter. We'd just like to welcome him to say a few words tonight before we kick off. Tamir.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate the opportunity to say hello to everybody. It's really an honor to have been chosen to lead the Victorian chapter of AJA. I'm a huge supporter, obviously, and a long-time member and a committee member. It was a natural progression to work towards a more meaningful and lasting contribution towards AJA and the wonderful work that we're doing on behalf of the Jewish community in Israel, in Australia and beyond. So it's an absolute pleasure. I just wanted to introduce myself. My name is Tamir Aloni. I'm based here in Melbourne. I'm a long-term volunteer of Jewish and Israeli Zionist causes, including many years as the president of Parents and Friends for Beitar Youth Group and Friends of Likud and other organizations. And I am here to basically take the Victorian chapter to the next level to really cement our spot as the voice of many of the what we call the silent majority of the Jewish people who agree with AJA's statements in relation to Israel and the Jewish community. Right. Contactable via the AJA website, but my email address is tamir at the Australian Jewish Association.org.au, and I would be very happy to engage with all of you who would ever like to be more involved here in Victoria. We're looking forward to growing this chapter over the next years to come.
Thank you so much, Tamir. And I will put his email into the chat if anybody wants to get in contact, especially if you'd like to volunteer for our upcoming Charity Day. That is on Sunday, the 24th of November, and you are based in Melbourne. Tamir will be leading that and the Melbourne group, so definitely reach out to him. Now for tonight, the war against Jews with David Hazony. The October 7 massacre unleashed a war against the Jewish people worldwide. How did this happen? And how can the Jewish community adapt and mobilize to win this fight? Our guest speaker tonight is David Hazony. He's a prominent writer and editor, the founding editor of the Tower magazine, and he served as the executive director of the Israel Innovation Fund. We have also been promised a few comments on the US election, so stay tuned. Thank you very much, and please welcome David.
Thank you so much. Really want to thank all of you for joining and for hosting me. And it's only 11 a.m. where I am, and it's already been a very crazy day. So I'm very much looking forward to sharing with you, as you mentioned, a few thoughts on the American election. Just to give a little bit of background as to who I am and why I'm here. As you can tell probably from my accent, I am US born, grew up in the northeastern United States, in New Jersey and in the Boston area, and went to college in New York City. And then I made Aliyah. I'm a child of Israelis. I grew up in a Hebrew-speaking home in America at a time when there were very few Hebrew-speaking homes in America, where if you heard Hebrew in the streets, this is the 1970s, somewhere you heard someone speaking Hebrew, you'd run over to them and say, "What are you doing here?" I had friends, and this was an educated college town of Princeton, New Jersey. I had friends.
So you've accidentally muted David. Let's get you unmuted again. There you are.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, you're back with us.
Okay. No, I was just saying that I actually had a friend this is a very educated college town of Princeton, New Jersey. I had a friend in childhood who asked me what kind of a name is Hazony, and I said it's Israeli, and he said there's no such thing. That's silly. It's a fake Italian name. And so that's how alien the Israeli experience was, and growing up in an Israeli home back in the 1970s to even the American Jewish community. Um, I made Aliyah at the age of 24. Served 3 months in the IDF with an awful in the 1990s with a very large number of Russian speakers. Learned to curse in Russian in the IDF. But professionally, I have been in the world of think tanks. I was one of the founders of the Shalem Center in Jerusalem. I became the editor of its journal Azure. I did a PhD in Jewish philosophy. Working on the magazine Azure, I learned a tremendous amount about a whole variety of fields, from archaeology to international law to economics, because I had to know stuff in order to be able to edit these pieces. And I learned a huge amount about the power of books and public intellectuals in shaping what people think. Um, it was while I was at the Shalem Center that Michael Oren wrote his breakout book, 6 Days of War, about the 6 Day War. That turned him into an extremely influential figure. Um, I recall when Deborah Lipstadt wrote her book, Denying the Holocaust, that essentially launched her career. But even closer to our own time, we all remember when Startup Nation came out and fundamentally shifted how people look at Israel. It turned, in a single phrase, turned what was always, Israel as the only democracy in the Middle East and David against Goliath. Suddenly, there was a term that captured the contribution that Israel was making to the world in a way that nobody else had ever done. And more recently, books like Dara Horn's People Love Dead Jews. Books have this ability, and public intellectuals have an ability to fundamentally alter the lens through which we look at the world, even when we don't buy the book, even when we don't read the book. It changes the way we have conversations. So I was very impressed with that. From 2013 to 2016, during the second Obama administration, I went back to the United States, worked in Washington at something called the Israel Project, where I got to see sort of the political machinery of America from very up close. And there too, I was still very impressed with the power that books can bring. Along the way, I became very frustrated with my exposure to American Jewry. Part of it was that there was a huge disconnect that I was perceiving, even among very pro-Israel American Jews, between their support for Israel and their understanding of what it meant to be Israeli. Part of it was a subordination of identity to politics, which I thought was very painful and hurtful to Jewish peoplehood. Um, and um, and I became very determined to find some way to reaffirm the Jewish people's commitment to itself as a people. Um, it felt like all of Jewish energy was being poured either into the local level or the sectorial level, whether it was Orthodoxy or liberal Judaism, or to the universal level, whether it was through politics or through Tikkun Olam. And I felt like there was very little that was being done to build a consciousness that we are a single people and that we need to work together. Um, just to give one example, when there was this huge wave of anti-Semitic attacks in France, I was shocked to see the absence of American Jewish active support. There were no delegations of high-ranking Jewish officials to Paris or to France to show solidarity, to connect with what Jews in France were encountering. And it really bothered me very deeply. And so in 2020, I had built a really fruitful relationship with Adam Bellow, who's the son of the Nobel Prize winning novelist Saul Bellow. And he had launched a brand new publishing house by the name of Wicked Sun Books. And he asked me to help him recruit books. And he turned to me and he said, well, if you care that much about the Jewish people, why don't you do an anthology? Anthologies can be extremely powerful if you do it right and if you pick the right niche. Then they can become something that everybody has to have on their shelves. And the question he asked me was, what's your niche? And I said, well, I've been American and Israeli. I've been Orthodox and secular. I've been on the left and on the right politically, and I've been young and I've been old. So how about the entire Jewish people? And he laughed and I laughed, and then we started thinking about it. And what emerged as a result of it was a book called Jewish Priorities. It's a little bit of a big fat hardcover. I don't know if you can see it. I've got the blur on. Hold on. There we go. Anyway, it's called Jewish Priorities, and 65 proposals for the future of our people. It came out, well, I'll tell you about when it came out in just a minute. And the idea was to really try to capture our people as a whole, from left to right, from ultra-Orthodox to secular, from the spokesman for the settler community in Hebron to the ardent diasporist Shalom Agid, and all across professions, from business and finance to rabbis to communal leaders, where each one of them, we told them, imagine you're giving a TED talk to the whole Jewish people, and you can talk about one priority for our future. Go. And my job was to make sure it was to get all the ducks in order and to make sure that we had as many essays as possible. And it began with 30, and it became 50, and then it became 65. And I started thinking, well, 70 is a really good Jewish number. And then the publisher said, no, you can't put any more essays in, because then the price point will be $45 instead of $35, whatever. At any rate, 65 was the number we ended up with. I began a long process of trying to plan what the launch of such a book would be. And we got some really fantastic stars. We have, Natan Sharansky and Dara Horn and Yossi Klein Halevi and Einat Wilf, and a lot of really, really important, interesting figures. Part of me also wanted to show the Jewish people that if you capture the entire Jewish people, you will see that the center of gravity is actually quite Zionist. This is a time when, in American Jewish conversation, Zionism and anti-Zionism felt like they were two competing views, and I had reason to believe that this was a misunderstanding of what American Jews really believe, and I wanted to show them that even on the liberal side of American Jewish life, there's a very, very large and powerful and passionate support for Israel and belief in Zionism. So I kind of wanted, that was sort of I don't want to say hidden agenda, but it was part of the message that emerged from this book. The publication date was set for October 23rd, 2023. We had an entire book tour lined up, including a full-day launch event at the Weizmann Museum in Philadelphia, a 9-speaker event at the Stryker Center, New York City. We had events scheduled in Palo Alto, California at the Z3 conference, in London, in Jerusalem, and even this first opening volley was 15 events in October. Then October 7th happened. When October 7th happened, my expectation, as all people, authors who are about to launch a book, believe the world, radically changes just before your book launch and it's all over. And I've seen it actually happen to quite a few very established authors. And I assumed that the entire launch would be canceled, and the exact opposite happened. I started getting phone calls from all of these venues where these events were scheduled to happen. And I was told, we want to go ahead with the event. If you're willing to come to America, we want to go ahead with the event, because this is exactly the conversation we need right now. And I realized that I was experiencing October 7th as an Israeli. I have 5 children who were suddenly in uniform, including frontline soldiers. I had gone through the trauma of October 7th knowing multiple people who knew somebody who had either been killed or had been abducted. But I had no idea what diaspora Jews were going through. And part of my mission on this trip now was to learn, was to at least from the American Jewish perspective, what American Jews were going through. And what I discovered was something really kind of strange. On the one hand, there was immense trauma. There was also fear. And I'm not just talking about ordinary Jews trying to live their lives. I'm not just talking about college students. I was speaking to some of the top American Jewish philanthropists who said to me, we have no idea what to do. There was fear. There was the word loneliness came up a lot, which was actually not something that Israelis really felt because as you all probably know, Israelis mobilized tremendously in the immediate aftermath of October 7th, not just hundreds of thousands of reservists showing up to fight the battle, but also at the level of civil society. There was suddenly a full year of judicial reform protest disappeared, and the country had been brought together powerfully. American Jews didn't feel that way. American Jews felt scared, alone, traumatized, and to the extent that they mobilized, and many did mobilize, they mobilized for Israel. Okay, they raised, I don't know, something like $1 billion US within the span of the first month for Israel, whether it was for gear for reservists or supporting the communities or the evacuees and so on and so forth. And I thought to myself, this is a little strange because on the one hand, first of all, the fact is that the Israeli government has a budget of about $140 billion and US. And the extent to which American Jewish philanthropy was absolutely needed, I'm not saying it wasn't appreciated, I'm not saying it didn't help, but the acute need of it from an Israeli perspective was was an interesting question to discuss. On the other hand, Israel also had an army, which American Jews do not have, which meant that Israel was preparing itself to fight back in a very powerful way. And the war that we've seen prosecuted over the last year was something that many, many, many Israelis would have told you on October 8th was going to happen because the determination and the fighting power of the country once unified is something that is really indomitable. And at the same time, we had the eruption of anti-Semitism around the world. Okay, the streets, and again, this is as early as October 8th, even possibly on the afternoon of October 7th, you already had people pouring into the streets supporting Hamas. And I felt that this was something that the American Jews were not understanding what was unfolding around them. That if they were to mobilize, the place to mobilize would be inside their own communities, because Israel will win its war. Okay, Israel will defeat its enemies. And its enemies around the world, there's a global opposition to Israel, and as we've subsequently learned, to Jews. That's going to play itself out in the diaspora, where Jews are more vulnerable. They're going to be targeted. Campuses are going to be targeted. Jewish community centers are going to be targeted. And that if American philanthropic priorities need to suddenly shift in the wake of October 7th, the place to put them is in building Jewish identity, building Jewish security, fighting political battles and cultural battles in diaspora countries against those people, against the anti-Semitic forces, and really to work together in that way. So I wrote an essay which appeared on November 7th called "The War Against the Jews," in which I tried to imagine what it might look like if Western Jewish leaders, diaspora Jewish leaders, and very specifically Americans, were to adopt a kind of war-fighting mindset in which, rather than either panicking or overreacting or just exploding, they actually internalized what is really a very rational posture that generals have when they're actually planning and executing wars. Meaning, let us think about who are our allies, who are our enemies, not be afraid to use that word, enemies, what are our resources, what should be the principles of action that we take, because unlike the time of the pogroms and unlike the time of the Holocaust, global Jewry has power. It has power perhaps more than at any point in our history, and we shouldn't be afraid, at least amongst ourselves, at least when thinking about fighting this war, to map out, where do we have strengths? Where do we have weaknesses? What are the resources we can use? Who is actually innovating on the battlefield in real time, such as students on a campus who drive around a truck with a billboard that shames the pro-Hamas people? What works? What doesn't work? How do we share it? And that was the origin of this essay that I wrote. It received tremendous response, mostly positive from many, many quarters that I didn't really expect it to reach. But there was one other thing that that captured my mind at that moment, and that was that I, as an Israeli, received tremendous strength after October 7th from younger Israelis. And one of the things that Israelis were exposed to much more so than what I found out about American Jews was that alongside all of the horror stories and the stories of terror and suffering and kidnapping, there were also an enormous number of stories of heroism that were emerging. And subsequently, they did penetrate into the consciousness of American Jews and diaspora Jews. But in the first month or so, they weren't hearing it. But as an Israeli, I was hearing it all the time, meaning on television news, I would say a third of the items were about stories of heroism rather than stories of victimhood. And the spirit that emerged, not just from the soldiers I was seeing on television, but from my own children, who were confident and coordinated and creative and really, really deeply committed to fighting for their country. That was what gave me strength, and we gave a lot of adult Israelis strength. And then I noticed that something parallel was happening in the United States, but nobody was talking about it, which was that among younger American Jews, there were emerging leaders who were taking matters into their own hands, were fighting back through protest, fighting back through social media, fighting back through lawsuits when it came to addressing their colleges that failed to restrain the anti-Semites. And that what you're seeing is the emergence of the future leaders of the Jewish people. So we had been talking about another book, and what we began working on was to collect these voices. And I'm pleased to announce to this group that in about 2 weeks, the book Young Zionist Voices, A New Generation Speaks Out, will be published. And my goal here is twofold. One is to assure the young people that there is a coherent Jewish response and a coherent Jewish leadership that is emerging from the college campuses and from under 30-year-olds. I'm very pleased that Elon Levy wrote the foreword of the book, and Zach Bodner, the head of the JCC of Palo Alto, California. I've also become, and I guess this is my most important biographical point that should be noticed, I've also been hired by an organization called the Z3 Project, which is based in Palo Alto. It's essentially a Zionist education project, and they've asked me to put together a think tank called the Z3 Institute for Jewish Priorities. So we have a very big conference coming up in Palo Alto on November 17th, where we'll be formally launching the Young Zionist Voices book. And I think that the fundamental message and the fundamental question that I'm constantly asking myself is, where are the Jews? Now, this brings us to meaning as a coherent people. Okay, where is our power? Where is our strength? Where is our ability to fight back? this question becomes far more acute in the wake of this morning's election. Sorry, this morning because I'm in Israel, so I've been watching American television all morning. In America, it was the middle of the night. For you, it's evening. Um, but there's a fundamental historical event happened a few hours ago, and it has real major implications for the Middle East. It has major implications for the future of America. It also has implications for diaspora Jews, many of whom will be more torn up than ever about the outcome of this election. Um, I will say the following. Um, I've been out of I made Aliyah more than 30 years ago. And although I feel very deeply connected to the United States, my life is as an Israeli. My family is Israeli, and I cannot help but look at all American politics, first of all, through the lens of what it means for Israel and for the Jewish people. Um, when Donald Trump was president previously, many good things happened for Israel. I'll be very open about it. We achieved peace agreements with some of the wealthiest countries in the Middle East. The United States formally recognized the Golan Heights, formally recognized Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. These are major historic events and shifts. I'll also say that as a political analyst, I always felt that President Trump understood something about foreign policy that neither Republicans nor Democrats before him had ever really understood. Um, and the reason for that is that foreign policy, in its essence, is not that different from New York real estate. New York real estate is a brutal, uh, Lord of the Flies kind of world where you want to build a building, you have to, file some lawsuits and bully people and I felt throughout his presidency that he had an acute instinctive understanding of raw power. And in the Middle East, you cannot succeed without raw power and without understanding who has it, who doesn't, what are the buttons to push. And so I feel I come away this morning, and I'm saying strictly from a foreign policy perspective, I feel neither qualified um, nor do I really want to get into the question of whether or not Trump is good for America as from a domestic perspective. But from a foreign policy perspective, I've always felt that he understood and understands how power works and how to be with the strong ones, and that's to follow strength, to follow the strong horse, and to lead through power, and that's how the Middle East works. So I uh, allow myself to express some hope that his election will help Israel win its wars, um, to do so quickly, so that my kids can come home uh, safely, and that previous traumas will not be repeated. Um, I um, I think that there is now a certain tailwind to the idea of Israel fighting its wars and winning them, which is something that has always been a matter of controversy in dealing with the United States, depending on who's in power. Um, and and I believe very deeply that this promotion of Israeli power will also be felt throughout the diaspora. I think that it will give Jews a sense that they have support and that they have momentum, and that the forces that have risen against the Jews are now going to find themselves on a back foot. If I've been watching Democratic Party analysts talk about the election this morning, and the overwhelming majority of them are saying we made a mistake when we, catered to our more radical voices. We need to shift back to the center and speak to ordinary people better. And all of this talk moves in the direction um, of reclaiming the universities, reclaiming the urban spaces, reclaiming common sense understanding of what anti-Semitism is and why there really no longer can be anybody can make the case that anti-Zionism is not the same as anti-Semitism because it's simply a new form of it. And these are things that were not clear even yesterday, are going to become more and more clear. I think that there's a really powerful extent to which these forces allied against the Jews are part of something that's allied against Western civilization as a whole. And now there is pushback. And the pushback has expressed itself through the results of the American election today. And I think it will continue to express itself. Whether Jews will understand that that's what's happening, whether the Jewish people as a whole will understand the extent to which we're in a world where our survival it requires that we understand how power works and build our own power and be strong together. That's something that I'm going to be committed to through the ZA3 Institute, through the books that I publish, and through these talks like these and others. That's really all I had to say. I'm really happy to hear your questions, and again to thank you all for taking the time this evening to hear me.
Thank you so
Thank you
much.
very much. Neil?
We'd like to go now to Dr. David Adler.
Okay. As we do each week, and particularly this week, make sure that at the end of the event, you do something to actively support AJA. Go to the website, jewishassociation.org.au, where you can ensure that you're signed up to the email list. Make sure you follow our social media. We are planning our annual charity campaign later this month. And if there is a possibility that you can help out as a volunteer on Sunday, the 24th of November, and particularly if you're able to be a matcher for the donations on that day, get in touch with AJA and we'll help arrange it. Next week, we're going to do a bit of a more deep dive into the US election analysis and commentary. We were holding off settling our speaker for next week pending the outcome of the election and whether it would be known quickly or whether the count would drag on for some time. This picture of the incoming president of the United States at the Ohel of the Rebbe is the reason why he was elected, of course. And I just wanted to add my personal comment to congratulate the president, and those that are local will understand, particularly in Sydney, why I'm elated. It's a day of courage and it's a day of victory, with no apologies to the radical Islamic preacher who said similar things following October 7. I thought that was a very interesting analysis. David, we're very much on the same page, and I can say that some of the trends that you've described in the dynamics of the American Jewish community exist here as well. And if there's an opportunity to add on emerging young Zionist leadership in Australia, you have two outstanding characters in this event in Tenniel and Robert. Robert's been made the CEO of AJA, which sets him up for a major leadership role going forward. So over to you, Tenniel, to handle the questions now.
Thank you so much. And I will reiterate, we are coming to our charity campaign Sunday, the 24th of November. We really, really need you guys. So please, I pop my email in the chat. Feel free to email me if you can volunteer or match. We do need the matches ahead of time. And if you can, please send me an email. We'll go to our questions now. We'll start with Alan, please.
Thanks, Daniil, and thank you, David. David, regarding the election, I saw a report that the exit polls reported that 79% of the Jews said that they voted Democrat. And this is despite all the mixed messaging that was coming out of the Biden administration. So it seems as if American Jews are really quite happy with what has been coming out of the administration over the last 12 months, which I must say I find a little surprising that more of them didn't reject that. Do you have any thoughts on that, please?
Yeah. So again, to remind you, I was in Washington for 4 years during the second Obama administration. Much of my energy at the time was spent fighting against the Iran deal and just trying to understand what was driving the administration's Middle East vision, and why. And I actually wrote a whole essay called "The Mind of the President," where I really take apart the Iran deal and the ISIS war and all these different pieces of the puzzle to try to create a theory behind it. When Joe Biden became president, there were a lot of assumptions that he would be just continuing Obama's vision, which I didn't agree with. I didn't think that would be the case. I reminded people that many of the people that are Obama people in the Biden administration were Clinton people before they were Obama people, that Obama was a relative newcomer to the Democratic Party, and that Joe Biden had been around for a very long time and had always been very supportive of Israel. The American administration has not been overtly hostile, and Joe Biden's instinctive support of Israel expressed itself through the immediate deployment of aircraft carriers, through look, for decades, every time Israel goes to war, there's a clock ticking. How long does Israel get to fight before America starts saying, okay, that's enough, and threatens sanctions and threatens to go to the UN Security Council? And we saw this in the Second Lebanon War, and we saw it in really every war that has been fought in my lifetime. That didn't happen in this war. Somehow Israel was allowed to continue fighting for more than a year, and it's still fighting. This, I believe, is a result of two things. One is that it's a war that really isn't Netanyahu's war. It's really the people's war. Israelis are overwhelmingly in support of its continuation. Reservists are overwhelmingly, even after serving for 150 days in the last year, they're still overwhelmingly committed to the war's goals and to fighting. And I think that the American administration saw that and realized that they had no leverage to try to stop it. And part of it is because I don't think President Biden is Barack Obama. He comes from a different place. He has different instincts, and he has his finger on the pulse of American voters and Democratic voters more than Barack Obama did, more than apparently Kamala Harris has. Having said that, there were, of course, places where pressure was exerted on Israel. There have been all sorts of places where the administration wants to show, and again, I see this largely as a political tactic, especially in the run-up to an election, where the administration wants to show that it's not in Israel's pocket and that it is very concerned about all sorts of things. And these are very uncomfortable for Israelis to hear. And yet, on a fundamental level, I do not believe that this administration was hostile to Israel's interests at a time of war, the way that many portrayed it. I think that Kamala Harris also made as much of an attempt as she could in the 3 months that she had to somehow make herself be part of the administration and express words of support for Israel, and at the same time to appeal to specifically voters in Michigan, who are hostile. The fundamental dynamic is one in which the Democratic Party, in its current constellation of its coalitions, anybody who's leading that party is going to feel a constant need to hedge, to maintain support from competing camps when it comes to Israel, far more so than a Republican leader. And when it comes to American Jews, I can't comment on those exit polls. I saw an exit poll that went very much the other way, that showed much surprising Jewish support for Trump. I think it's going to take a few days before we can see polling that's reliable when it comes to how the Jews actually voted. If it went towards the polling in advance, I understand, not exit polls, but polling that took place, say, a month ago, did look like more Jews were voting for Trump than had voted for any previous Republican candidate. So I actually think that it's likely that if there was a shift, it went the other way. Certainly in the Orthodox community in places like New York City, there's overwhelming support for Trump, and the Orthodox are, because they have a lot of children, they're growing in their portion of the Jewish community. But more importantly, I think that there is a silent majority of liberal American Jews who are very supportive of Israel, who are much more so since October 7th, who've been willing to be much more vocal about their support for Israel since October 7th. And these are the people that Harris was also trying to appeal to. So I think that look, inside of Israel, there is huge polarization, and Bibi is turned into a fascist, and people on the left are turned into, Hamas supporters, and a lot of really nasty words are said domestically. And inside the United States, it's no different. When I was a kid in high school, Ronald Reagan was president of the United States, and every morning I came to school and was told, this movie actor is going to get us all killed in a thermonuclear war because he's crazy. That's what I was taught growing up in high school. And looking back, we view him as one of the great presidents of our lifetime. So I think that people are very much taken by the domestic politics of the moment and polarized by it. I think that there's a very powerful loathing of Donald Trump among American Jews, who their ideal president is an intellectual and a kind and very refined, and Trump doesn't fit in any of these categories. But the support for Israel in America is very, very widespread. Something like 85% of Americans in general support Israel in its war against Hamas. And I think that American Jews will now be faced with a very powerful dilemma, because they see the Christian right in America as the Cossacks. They are very confused by the rise of an anti-Semitic left. They don't know what to do with it. They have been stabbed in the back by their progressive allies, who supported Hamas's attacks among the elites. They feel very much alone. And the message I have to diaspora Jewish liberals is, you have a family. Okay, you don't have to agree on their politics, but you have a family. And now is the time to come together.
Thank you. Jeff, please unmute.
Shalom. David, you are much too generous to Obama and his big mistakes in the form of Biden and Harris. The left are not very generous to people who let them down, and it can reasonably be presumed that they will lacerate Obama, so he won't have that much power. However, what do you think is going to happen in the last 70 days of the last 12 years of the de facto Obama presidency? And I use the word de facto, 12 years. How much power do you think he'll have left to do some more damage to Judaism? Never mind about Biden, he's demented, and that is that. What do you think is going to be the next course of action by this lunatic government, given the 70 days they've got left to do mischief and evil?
I don't know. I know that in the past, we all saw what President Obama did in the remaining weeks that he had, where he allowed the UN to pass UN Security Council to pass a resolution 2334 that that put Israel in a bind when it came to the settlements in the West Bank and Jerusalem and so forth. The vindictive nature of the Obama administration began with President Obama and with his personal animosity towards Prime Minister Netanyahu and his frustration, deep frustration that the world didn't follow his vision. And it wasn't just Israel. He expressed that frustration to Jeffrey Goldberg, I believe, that he couldn't understand why France and other allies were so, didn't adopt his rationalistic utopian view of the world. And I don't think the administration is the same administration. So I actually, and moreover, they have much less leverage now than they would have had if Harris had won, because any harsh moves towards Israel at this point, on the one hand, it can be instantly undone when Trump takes office and therefore has no lasting power. And on the other hand, the Democratic Party is right now in shock. And at least, again, one is to hope for the sake of America that they realize that they have a significant amount of reckoning to do. And part of it has to do with their detachment from the American people. The American people are pro-Israel. And so it doesn't do the Democratic Party any good for the administration right now to take vindictive action against Israel. It doesn't mean it won't happen, but it is not in their political interest to do so. So it would surprise me more than what Obama did surprised me. Put it that way.
Thanks, David. Anne, would you like to unmute?
Hi there, David. So my question
Hi.
is, now that Trump, okay, I'll try to be quick. Now that Trump is elected, do you think he will fulfill his promise to get all the hostages released from Gaza and hopefully to get Hamas to surrender?
I actually believe that Gaza is going to take longer than Lebanon or even Iran. I think that what has happened in the last couple of months is that, and this is really important to understand, there has been a very, very, very fundamental strategic shift in the Middle East in the last 2 months. Okay, we have been told for decades that Iran is the menace and Hezbollah is what deters Israeli response. Hundreds of thousands of rockets they have aimed at us. That's what keeps Israel from being able to fight back. In the last 2 months, Hezbollah has been devastated, which is the main proxy that Iran has through which to fight its wars. And Israel has eliminated Iran's aerial defense. It's the S-300s. Okay, which means that right now at this moment, Israel has the capacity to strike any target, with the exception of the deeply, deeply below ground targets, such as their uranium enrichment and such as many of their ballistic missiles. This is the weakest and most vulnerable Iran has been. This is something that President Trump will intuitively understand and want to capitalize on. And I think that it's very possible that we're going to see resolution in terms of Lebanon, in terms of Yemen, in terms of the militias, and in terms of, and possibly the beginning of the end of the Iranian regime itself Hamas is a bit of a different kind of a bird. Okay, Hamas is not a Shiite proxy of Iran in the same sense. Hamas existed um, before it became an Iranian asset, and had a decade and a half to almost 2 decades to entrench itself very, very, very deeply. Um, and whereas while Hezbollah controls its population mainly through money, which is why Israel targeted the banks in Lebanon, Hamas controlled its population by controlling the food. Okay, the reason why the Israel's rejection of UNRWA has been taken so harshly by so many people begins with the fact that UNRWA is in fact what keeps Hamas in power, because UNRWA is how the food gets in. Then the Hamas guys get on the UNRWA truck with their guns, and Hamas uses the food to control the population, uses the food to enrich itself because it doesn't give away the food, it sells it. And until we can break that cycle, I don't see any real resolution in Gaza. Even if tomorrow the Iranian regime were to collapse and there would be a new Iranian revolution, Hamas would still control its population through power, through UNRWA, and through the humanitarian aid. So I'm only saying that because it's actually a different problem than Iran, even though Iran has been one of its biggest supporters. My hope is that the new administration, with the support of Congress, will target UNRWA very specifically, and will be able to finally detach Hamas from the food supply and the humanitarian aid supply to Gaza, which will really, really dramatically undermine its power. And the other problem is that they have a lot of guns. And the only way to solve that problem is to find some kind of a permanent security solution in which there are many, many more guns and more physical power than what Hamas can threaten its population with.
Thank you. Shoshana, would you like to unmute, please? Oh, just
I haven't
did.
unmuted.
there
Yeah,
we go.
I am
Yeah.
unmuted. Okay, I hope this doesn't get me kicked out of the club. As you said, the Jewish voice has to be coherent, but could it be more cohesive? For example, I'm a member of AJA, ZFA, UIA, ADL, and there seems to be division between these groups that I don't understand. Is that possible? I mean, given two Jews, three arguments, is it possible that we can become more united? Not right wing or left wing, but just Jewish?
That's a great question, and you certainly aren't kicked out of my club for asking it. So at Z3, we have this phrase that we use, which is unity without uniformity, which sounds like potentially an empty slogan because it's potentially empty. But in order to fill it, it requires that Jews become more fundamentally tribal. That is to say, to remember that we are a tribe, to remember that Jewish interests are ultimately, in the long run, aligned because the people who want to hurt us don't care which Jews vote for which parties. And I hate to say that it's our crisis that has to bring us together, but that is the reality. Jews are very, very, very impassioned about politics. They're very impassioned about culture. They're very impassioned about the world outside of them, to the point where many Jews have completely subordinated their identity to helping the world in one way or another, and that is how they are Jews. I think there's been a shift. I know that in the United States, there were 2 studies conducted in the spring, one by the Jewish Federations of North America and the other by the American Jewish Committee, both of which showed what they called a surge of Jewish engagement among American Jews. which is to say, whether it's support for Israel, whether it's going to shul on Shabbat, studying Torah, there has been a dramatic increase in Jewish engagement among American Jews. Whether or not that becomes a permanent shift, I don't know. And I think the election could have an impact on that. But I think that there really is a fundamental growing awareness that it's just us. All of our alliances are limited in principle. The only unlimited alliance that we can have is with other Jews. And that while we are a tiny people, we punch very, very far above our weight. And the more we work together, the more we will be able to effectively protect our interests. I will just add, though, that this also requires a kind of reckoning, however. I went and checked how many people have resigned in Israel as a result of October 7th. And although we haven't seen it at the political level, we have seen it among the upper echelons of the military. We had the commander of the Gaza force who resigned, the head of the military intelligence resigned, the head of the Shin Bet resigned, and the head of 8200, the intelligence unit, resigned. There is an awareness in Israel that we screwed up collectively, and we need to have a reckoning about how we screwed up. I'm not seeing that in the diaspora so much. I'm not seeing heads of defense organizations resign because they failed to see the coming avalanche of anti-Semitism, even though that was their job. I haven't yet seen that reckoning take place, and it troubles me because diaspora Jews are in a mess, and the people who got us into that mess aren't the ones who are going to get us out of it. So I still think the diaspora has a way to go in order to understand that this enormity of anti-Semitism, what we're hearing instead is nobody could have possibly seen it coming. Well, there were people who saw it coming. Okay, there were writers. There's a book that came out in October of 22 called Woke Anti-Semitism, which was a powerful warning about the anti-Semitism that was coming. Gil Troy and Natan Sharansky wrote a powerful essay called The Un-Jews that attacked Jewish anti-Zionism. Ami Hirsch, the Reform rabbi on the Upper West Side of Manhattan, gave a speech where he talked about progressive anti-Zionist Jews as a, quote, sickness within the Reform movement that had to be fought against. Isabella Tovarovsky wrote about, there were countless warnings given, and the American Jewish establishment, and I believe to a large extent the diaspora Jewish establishment as a whole, failed at their jobs. And until that is internalized, and until diaspora Jewish institutions realize that they have to fundamentally change, then we're not going to see the kind of unity that you're describing.
There's also a book, David, on the failure of American Jewish leadership, written by Avi Goldwasser and I've forgotten the other author. I've spoken, Charles Jacobs.
Mm-hmm. Betrayal. You're talking about it's a collection
Betrayal.
of essays, yes.
The Betrayal is the headline, and then the subtitle is Failure of American Jewish Leadership. Look, there are lessons to be learned from that, absolutely. And let me assure Shoshana, you don't get kicked out of this club for raising the issue and asking the questions that you have. But we also need the maturity to work together on issue A, even if we disagree on the approach on issue B. And my wife's just given me a copy of, it's not going to show because I've got virtual background on, but a copy of that book that I mentioned. Yeah.
Thank you. We are almost out of time. So David, we'd like to ask you for your closing remarks, and if you could leave us with one thing that our community can do to make a positive impact.
Well, first of all, again, thank you so much. We have really an incredible conference lined up in Palo Alto called the Z3 conference on Sunday the 17th. It's a full day, and the plenary sessions will be webcast. So if you just do a search for Z3 project, it'll direct you. It's a free registration for the webcast. We have Naftali Bennett is our closing plenary speaker, and he's going to be fascinating. Adela Kochav, who is a young Zionist voice who appears in her book. She's the morning keynote speaker. She made headlines in 2019 when she sued her university for anti-Semitism at a time when nobody had done that before, which got the Trump White House to change the application of the Civil Rights Act to cover anti-Semitism, and which opened the door to hundreds of lawsuits. So I do invite you all to tune in on Sunday. It's the full day Palo Alto time, and I have absolutely no idea what the time difference is between California and you guys. So I assume that for all I know, it could be Thursday. But Young Zionist Voices will be coming out. We have two Australian contributors, Josh Feldman and Kivi Franks, who wrote essays in the book as well. If we can to really pay attention to that book when it comes out and show the community that your principal concern is about Jewish life as a whole and Jewish communal cohesion as a whole, as so many of you have expressed, and that the time has come for diaspora Jewish institutions to start hearing the voices of younger people, because they're the ones who are bearing the brunt of it. They're the ones who have to sit in classes on campus and have professors tell them why Israel is a colonialist, genocidal, apartheid state. They're the ones who have to decide whether or not to wear a Magen David outside, in public. They're the ones who really are facing the brunt of this. And they're the ones, when they choose to fight back and they find ways of fighting back, they're the ones who are going to inherit the torch of leadership of this community. And so it really is time to listen to them and to hear them. And they have something to say, really. Their conceptions of, one of the things that I was just blown away by when I was editing this book was they have very different ideas of what Zionism is and should be than we did growing up. Some of them go as far as to say that from their perspective, Zionism and Judaism are the same thing. Some of them talk about how the Zionist act is not to run away from the diaspora and make aliyah. The Zionist act is to stay and fight. And the same thing with colleges, not to abandon the elite schools, but to stay and to fight for their hard-earned positions. It's really, really interesting to hear what they have to say and to keep reminding ourselves that they will inherit the community. So we should give them a fair hearing.
David, thank you so much for your thoughtful and meaningful insights into Israel and the USA. One thing I am very proud to be part of the AJA is that both Robert and myself, we are quite young. And I'm really thankful and grateful to David Adler and the other committee members who do give us that voice in the community. And I mean, Rob is a young adult, but he is just incredible. The things he writes, the things he says, the way his mind works. So it's really proud for us that we have a platform where we can get our voice out, where we're respected, and we feel like we can represent and help the Jewish community here in Australia. Thank you to everybody who's joined us tonight on our Facebook Live, on our Zoom, listening in tomorrow on J-Air. I will remind everybody this is being recorded and will be available on YouTube tomorrow. Please share with your family and friends. Please get these deep, insightful messages around. Thank you very much, everybody, and we look forward to seeing you next week.